Good evening, I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles, and here's some of the stories we're watching tonight.
Americans can rest assured that our banking system is safe.
Federal regulators seem to be pulling out all the stops to shore up the banking system. That's after the second and third largest bank failures in U.S. history. So what happens next? And in light of the recent kidnapping, some Texas officials are telling people that it's too dangerous to travel to Mexico. Now a senator and congressman are calling on the State Department to issue a warning about buying prescription drugs from Mexican pharmacies. Plus, as we inch closer to spring, parts of the country that have yet to see snow could be on the verge of seeing a whole lot of it. While another onslaught of the wet stuff is on its way to California. And then artificial intelligence. It is making it way too easy to imitate someone's voice with a few clicks of a button. So we're going to take you to Silicon Valley to see what it's all about. This is what my voice sounds like when I clone it. Let's see. This is what my voice sounds like when I clone it. Wow. And get ready to dance. The one and only Steve Kornacki joins us to break down the NCAA bracket ahead of March Madness. Is your money safe? That's the question on the minds of a lot of Americans tonight after that historic collapse of two U.S. banks. The banks in question here are Silicon Valley Bank, a 40-year-old institution and a lender to some of the biggest tech companies, and second, New York-based Signature Bank, which specialized in commercial real estate and digital asset banking. Now, when a bank shuts down, the immediate worry for its customers is what happens to their money. And that's definitely on display in Santa Clara, California today, where people lined up outside the Silicon Valley Bank's main office to see what was going on.
We hope to have the money as close as it can be to somewhere where I feel a lot safer about it, and learn a bit more about exactly what's going on, because things are moving very, very quickly.
Yeah, things are moving very quickly for sure. The Fed has already created a new bank term funding program to safeguard people's deposits, all while the federal government is assuring Americans that their money is safe and that they have nothing to worry about.
Americans can have confidence that the banking system is safe. Your deposits will be there when you need them. Small businesses across the country, the deposit accounts at these banks can breathe easier knowing they'll be able to pay their workers and pay their bills. No losses will be, and this is an important point, no losses will be borne by the taxpayers.
NBC News technology correspondent Jake Ward joins me now. Jake, can you tell us a little bit more about Silicon Valley Bank? This was a fixture in the capital of global tech, right?
That's absolutely right, Gadi. I mean, this place, Silicon Valley Bank, was an A-rated institution up until a week ago, but it was very different from traditional banks. It was the place you went as a startup founder when your numbers just wouldn't make sense to a traditional banker. When you are receiving VC, venture capital money to fund your business, you, as a result, don't really have any assets. You don't have a product. You're not making a profit. So your traditional bank would look at you and say, no thanks. But in this particular case, we have instead an institution that's specialized in making lines of credit available to those people, offering mortgages to the founders, all sorts of things that a traditional bank would never do. But that is part of the problem. You had this very small set of customers, the people who put their money into this bank, who had enormous deposits inside, and were all in each other's DMs. They're all connected, and when they begin to panic together and make a run on this bank, they brought it down incredibly quickly. We saw very 22nd century conditions contributing to the very 19th century downfall of this bank, Gadi.
Yeah, a digital run on a bank, pretty much. Silicon Valley Bank, this is the 16th largest bank, nearly $200 billion in assets. Signature Bank had over $110 billion in assets. Friday, one goes down, then a couple days later, the next. How did Signature Bank get wrapped into all this?
Well, Signature Bank is a high-end real estate and legal bank. It also had a certain amount of exposure to crypto. But according to Representative Barney Frank, the former representative, who is also a board member of that bank, he spoke to our colleagues at CNBC, and he said that it was basically contagion, that it was the panic that began here and then spread to Signature's customers that then set off that run. And that is, of course, why we're seeing so much activity at the regulatory level about trying to stem that panic, because we've already seen it move from one bank to another and bring them both to their knees, Gadi.
And we'll see if that's the case. Jake, thanks so much. And economics editor for CNBC.com, Jeff Cox, joins me now. Jeff, so talk to us about the impact of all this on the average American. How worried should the non-tech person be?
Well, Gadi, at this point, the non-tech person doesn't need to be particularly worried. As you showed in the last segment, President Biden telling us all that depositor money is completely guaranteed. Taxpayers are not going to have to bear any burden from it. However, we have been down this road before. Anybody who was around during the last financial crisis knows how these things can mushroom out of control. Lehman Brothers was basically a small part of the financial plumbing in our country, and it went down and just inspired this whole crisis of confidence that set this domino effect into place. So I think obviously if you're an investor in banks right now, that there's a lot of concern there, if you're a stockholder, but as far as the average American who's got some money in the bank doesn't need to really be worried about this very much right now.
And yet, Jeff, I bet you got some direct messages or at least some text messages from loved ones asking, what do I do? So what do you say to somebody who's thinking of rushing to their regional bank first thing tomorrow morning to take out their money?
Yeah, I was in a conversation with a family member who's an accountant and wanted to transfer some money from the business into a pretty well-established financial institution and wanted to know, is it safe? I said, of course it's safe. Right now, the basics of our system is very safe. So anybody who wants to run to the bank tomorrow and take their money out, I would say, please don't do that. It's completely not necessary. Again, however, though, this is a good time to sort of just do an inventory. Look at where your investments are. Look at where your deposits are. One of the big issues with SVB especially was the fact that there were so many deposits there that were over the federally insured limit. So those were not guaranteed. And I think it's just a good time for everybody to just sort of look and say, hey, am I making the right moves with my money at this point?
And take things slowly. Jeff, thanks so very much.
Absolutely.
And we've got an update in the case on those murders of the 4 students at University of Idaho that was back in November. New court documents show warrants were served to dozens of massive companies in connection to the murders, including Apple, Google, Verizon, even Tinder. New search warrants revealing dozens of major companies are being forced to turn over information in connection with the murder case against Brian Koberger.
All right.
Among those served, tech names like Apple, Amazon, Google, and DoorDash, social media companies Meta, Snapchat, and Tinder, and retailers Walmart and K-Bar Knives, the brand of knife sheath found at the crime scene with a single source of male DNA linked to Koberger. But not all the warrants are focused on the suspect. Some are requesting bank and social media information about the victims.
They're trying to find out if there is a hidden link that could explain a motive.
They will never be forgotten.
The 4 college students were found stabbed to death in an off-campus home last November. Authorities still haven't publicly released a motive, but alleged cell phone data shows Koberger stalked their house at least a dozen times before the killings and even went back to the crime scene hours after the murders. Experts say data from these warrants may help investigators piece together an even stronger digital footprint.
They are going all in, if you will, gathering every single conceivable piece of evidence so that if any doubt is raised, they will be ready.
Meanwhile, we're also learning new details about what officials say Koberger was doing the moment he was arrested at his parents' house across the country in Pennsylvania.
Brian, what you doing?
The 28-year-old wearing gloves while separating his trash.
Mr. Koberger was found awake in the kitchen area, dressed in shorts and a shirt and wearing latex medical-type gloves, and apparently was taking his personal trash and putting it into separate Ziploc baggies.
The Monroe County 1st District Attorney calling that behavior significant for the investigation.
To me, that's incredibly damning. It shows a consciousness of guilt, that he was making sure that his DNA did not end up in the trash.
Other newly unsealed search warrants show what police did seize in Pennsylvania, including a gun and knife, black face masks and gloves, a cell phone, multiple laptops, and a book with underlining on page 118. Investigators also say they found a shovel in Koberger's Hyundai Elantra and seized parts from the car itself, from the headrests and the seatbelt to brake and gas pedals. Meanwhile, Kohlberger is expected to be back in court in June. And turning now to the weather, rain, snow, winds, you name it, and California got it this weekend. But as the communities are reeling from the last storm still, another one seems to be on the way. And I want to show you this. Check this out. This is taken this last weekend in Tahoe. And someone captured this video of snow piled on their house in Olympic Valley. This video was taken last Thursday. Since then, the front of that house has collapsed from the weight of the snow.
Well, this is what my house looks like now. Walking in. Some of the roof collapsed, and more of it is on the way, so.
Meanwhile, down below, a levee break in Monterey, California, caused intense floods in the community of Pájaro. Over 8,000 people were forced to evacuate, and dozens had to be rescued from the rising water levels. NBC News correspondent Nayela Charles joins us now from Pájaro. Nayela, more bad weather's on the way. How are people getting ready?
Well, right now, Gadi, these people here that live in Pájaro haven't been able to get back into their homes since Friday when they were evacuated in the middle of the night with no notice after the levee breach. So right here, these people are just looking for answers. That's why they're waiting here with officials pleading to get back inside their homes. We're told a lot of them left with just the clothes on their backs and their kids. So that's why they're here now. If you look over here, over the bridge, you can see some people standing over the riverbank there. Some of those people were unhoused already. Others live in Pájaro, but still are waiting there until they can get answers. And now with another atmospheric river expected tonight, they don't know how they're going to get through the next couple of days. Officials tell us they still don't have answers for them for when they can get back into their homes. Gadi?
And Nayela, Pájaro has a diverse community, a lot of migrant farm workers. How is this affecting the way of life down there?
Well, the community here, a lot of migrants, like you mentioned, low income, a lot of farm workers, and we're told they were already on difficult times because the seasons, with all the rain coming, they have to work on the farmland, and the farmland has been covered with water. And right now it's flooded, and they don't know when they're going to be able to go back to work. So listen to one of these community organizers we spoke to who told us what it's like for the people who live here and their fears and frustrations. Gadi?
With the most basic things like medications and food and clothing. So they have been struggling to get their medications in hand. A lot of people also left, pets and things like that. And so they've been trying to get over to at least make sure that they're okay and if they can bring it onto the side.
So now the people here are waiting anxiously. Some of them were told living in their cars now with more rain expected. Officials say the next concern here is that more rivers will crest. That will create possibly more flooding, more damage to homes, and more problems for the people who live here. Gadi?
You gotta feel for those people right behind you. They're so close to their homes yet so far away. Nayela, thanks so much. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, millions are bracing for a nor'easter. Check this out. Some places in New York and Massachusetts are expecting over a foot of snow, and cities there are preparing for the weather with a whole lot of salt. NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns joins us now. Bill, we've had atmospheric rivers now. Now we're seeing a nor'easter. Can you walk us through what's happening there?
And Gadi, are you ready? I mean, Los Angeles could be like ground zero for this next storm.
No, I'm not ready. I wasn't ready the last time, not ready this time either.
Yeah, the last storm, by the way, only less than an inch of rain in Los Angeles. They're calling for over 3 inches of rain in Los Angeles. Like, people don't understand that don't live in Los Angeles. That's a lot of rain for Southern California. That's huge issue. So we'll get into that. The reason I'm talking about all this is because this is the latest atmospheric river. I colorized the clouds here. The colder cloud tops I painted red. That's where it shows you a lot of the thunderstorms are, or the higher moisture. And you can kind of see that fire hose is pointing right at Santa Barbara, heading towards Los Angeles. And that's not good. That's not what we want to see. We don't want it heading anywhere, but that's the general direction. 20 million people in California are under flash flood watches now, including the Los Angeles area. So the rain's going to start north, and then it's going to head south later tonight and all day tomorrow. And once again, we have that rare high risk of flash flooding in almost the exact same areas of the last time. The foothills outside of Fresno and the southern Sierra outside of Potterville, and then from just north of L.A., from Santa Barbara, Santa Maria, all all the way almost up to Monterey, that high risk. And even Los Angeles, extremely rare to be in a moderate risk of flash flooding. And that's because we're expecting the incredible rainfall rates. And this will be one of the biggest rainstorms Los Angeles has had in possibly years in a few cases. So right now we're predicting a little over 3 1/3 inches in Los Angeles. Look at Santa Barbara. That's going to be a problem. We get 4 inches of rain coming down those hillsides. Any of the recent burn scars, the mud, debris flows, you get it. It's going to be a huge issue down here. And then, of course, with the snow melt, too, even Lake Arrowhead's supposed to get 4 inches of rain. Remember, that was the area that had the feet, 5, 10 feet of snow. Well, a lot of that's going to melt in this storm, plus 4 inches of rain. So you can imagine the runoff problems, too. So a lot of issues. We're going to talk about Southern California probably for a couple days after this event tomorrow. And then, yes, we will get another 3 to 5 feet, but very high elevations. And we're talking maybe even above most of the mountain passes and above most of the ski resorts. Now turning to the Northeast, and it's just interesting. This is the first nor'easter. The biggest snowstorm of the winter is happening in the middle of March for areas of the Northeast. Typically, at the high elevations, getting a foot of snow this time of year is kind of a yawn. It's like, all right, we've done this before a couple times this winter. But in many cases, this is the first time. They have plenty of salt to use, and a lot of people are going to be out there with their plows because they haven't been able to use them much this winter. But southern Maine, central New England, a lot of the big cities will be too warm, a little bit of snow on the end of the storm. For Boston, Hartford, Bridgeport, New York City, you'll see snowflakes, but no accumulations likely. And you can almost kind of make out where the mountains are here. That's who is going to get a foot plus. Some areas will get 2 feet, especially the Catskills. That's the Adirondacks. These are the Berkshires. These are the white and green mountains here in Vermont and also areas of New Hampshire. So, Gadi, we're going to have, it's kind of a classic nor'easter. It's going to be very windy, and there's going to be a lot of snow. And I'm worried about that combination and power outages.
Yikes. And coming back to the West Coast here, we just saw some families that were being held back from their houses, and yet the sky behind them looked pretty clear. And so they're being held back from their houses because there's flooding, and you got to wonder when the next storm's going to hit. Are they going to have enough time to get into their houses, possibly take anything out of there before the next one rolls in? How much time do they have?
Today. I think after tonight, the rain will be moving into most areas. I know Southern California, it's more tomorrow afternoon, but yeah, time's up shortly.
Yikes. Bill, thanks so much. And still to come, clashes at the southern border. Hundreds of migrants rushing the border tried to force their way past federal officials. And if you're finalizing your spring break plans, you're going to want to hear this. Why the State Department is saying stay away from parts of Mexico.
This is basically the first time I hear of regular citizens going missing. Like I said, we've never had this issue before that I can remember.
At a border crossing in Juarez, Mexico, tensions hit a breaking point with a crowd of hundreds rushing past Mexican authorities and clashing with Border Patrol right in front of El Paso. Now, this is what it looked like as border officials stopped hundreds of migrants trying to get into the U.S. yesterday. Agents moved barriers and barbed wires to block a bridge connecting Juarez and El Paso. And most of the migrants said they were from Venezuela and they were trying to claim asylum. Many are frustrated with the asylum process, which includes an app that's supposed to make claims easier. But migrants say the app doesn't work. And if you're planning a spring break trip to Mexico, the chief of public safety in Texas has this warning.
Our department is urging anyone thinking about traveling into Mexico, especially spring breakers, to avoid those areas, because right now it is too dangerous with the increase in violence and kidnappings that are taking place in Mexico.
Now, the State Department also has travel warnings for most of the country. You see, these 6 states that we put up right here, that is where Americans should reconsider visiting or not travel to at all, according to authorities. And all this comes after 4 Americans were shot at by cartel gunmen, apparently confusing them with other people. That happened earlier this month in the border city of Matamoros. 2 were killed. The other 2 are now back in the United States. Meanwhile, 3 women are still missing after driving into Mexico last month. 2 sisters and a friend crossed to sell clothing at a flea market, and no one has heard from them since. NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas joins us now. Guad, thanks so much for joining us. What else can you tell us about these missing women in Mexico?
Gadi, we know that the husband of one of them was the one that informed authorities on the American side. Two of them live in Peñitas, Texas. That's a city outside of McAllen. We spoke with the chief of police of that city. He told us the husband came to the station and spoke to them after he was unable to communicate with his wife. He said she had crossed into Mexico on February 24th. They were going there to sell clothes, and at some point they made a wrong turn, and then he was unable to speak with his wife after that. The chief of police said he turned over the investigation to the FBI, and we also know that Mexican state authorities are searching for the three missing women. There is a relative that spoke to local media in Mexico who said that drones were used by Mexican state authorities to try and find more clues as to where the vehicle that the women were in could have gone when they last heard from them. But as of now, they are still missing in Mexico, Gadi.
And Guad, we've seen some lawmakers warning people not to go to Mexico to buy prescription drugs. They're warning that some of them might be laced with fentanyl or the pharmacies aren't trustworthy. Are those warnings right now legit?
Well, Gadi, it's difficult to say. What we have to look at is the Department of State's advisory when it comes to any American leaving U.S. soil, right? So if you're going to go to Mexico for any reason, the advice is for Americans to look at that website. Every state is different. Every city is different. The Department of State has different levels for places in Mexico. For someone in San Diego crossing into Tijuana, it could be very different than someone, for example, in El Paso crossing into Juarez, or someone crossing into Tamaulipas on the other side of the border. So the advice is for individuals to check the Department of State's website and see what dangers exist in that part of Mexico. Now, when it comes to the pharmacies, we know that a lot of individuals, Americans, cross into Mexico to buy medicine, but that's just a decision that people have to make on their own. Perhaps they can speak to a doctor or consult the right individuals or experts that can tell them if this is something they should be doing. But of course, what we can say is that the Department of State in the U.S., they are the ones that are in charge of informing Americans of any dangers when it comes to traveling abroad, Gadi.
Now, let's say you have your tickets booked, you have no travel insurance, you can't change or cancel your flights or hotels, and you decide to go to Mexico anyway. How can people keep themselves safe?
Right. So we have this warning that came from the Texas state authorities asking people not to go to Mexico for spring break or after. It's unusual to have that come from a state, Gadi. Again, the Department of State has a list of the states that you should not visit in Mexico. You mentioned there's 6 of them. Most of the hot spring break locations are not in those regions. Over the weekend, we actually spoke to spring breakers who are now in Mexico who talked about how they feel about these warnings. Here's one of them.
Obviously, the border is a very different place than Cancun. It's much more tourist-based, so it feels a lot more homey and a lot more safer here.
Now, that spring breaker visiting Cancun. Cancun is in the state of Quintana Roo, and then you have places like Cabo, which is in the state of Baja California Sur. Both of those are not on that do not travel list. They are at a level 2, which the Department of State asks Americans to take precautions when going into those areas. But again, the website details all the dangers that exist, and people that make these trips to Mexico just have to make a decision on a case-by-case basis. Gadi, there is some advice for people that take the trip also. Turn on your location services on your phone. Make sure that someone in the U.S. knows where you're at and has your location. Also, speak to the resort or hotel that you're staying in to see if there's a safer way to go from and to the airport, and register with the nearest consulate so they know that you are in Mexico at that time or during the time that you are on vacation for spring break, Gadi.
NBC's Guad Venegas, great advice. Thanks so much. At least 8 people have died after 2 boats capsized off the coast of San Diego. It happened this weekend just off the shore of Black's Beach. Authorities say they think the boats were involved in a smuggling operation.
This is not necessarily people trying to find a better life. This is part of a transnational criminal organization effort to smuggle people into the United States. These people are often labor trafficked and sex trafficked when they arrive.
Now, one boat made it to shore, the other didn't. Here's NBC News correspondent Damon in Griffin with more.
San Diego police received a 911 call from a woman in one of those Panga boats around midnight Sunday. She said there was a crash and that her boat carrying 8 people made it to shore but a second one carrying 15 capsized in the water. At least 8 adult bodies have been found. 7 people remain missing. Now, this sparked a dangerous rescue attempt that lasted about an hour yesterday. They then transitioned to a recovery mission that lasted about 5 hours. Crews found no additional survivors. Now, according to the U.S. Coast Guard, since 2017, there's been a 771% increase in human trafficking in the Southern California coastal region. Since 2021, there have been 23 lost lives at sea. Officials say this is not necessarily people trying to find a better life, but a transnational criminal organization smuggling people into the U.S. Officials adding that these people are often labor trafficked and sex trafficked when they arrive. Now, the search has since been suspended. Officials say for those missing, it's unclear if they made it to land or if they died. Back to you.
NBC's Dana Griffith, thanks so much. After the break, an anti-Semitic incident on Stanford's campus. We're going to tell you what was left on a Jewish student's door. But before we go, look at this. This is a house in North Carolina that collapsed into an ocean. And this is not the first time this has happened out on the Outer Banks. Last year, 2 unoccupied homes collapsed onto the shore. You could see it literally floating into the ocean. That's insane. We'll be right back. And it's time now for some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. Mitch McConnell is out of the hospital after he was treated for a concussion and a broken rib. The Senate Minority Leader fell at a private dinner last Wednesday, but he's not home yet. A rep for McConnell says he's doing physical therapy at an inpatient rehab center. Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former lawyer, testified today before a Manhattan grand jury as part of a hush money investigation. The payment in question was made to adult film actress Stormy Daniels, who alleges she slept with Trump before he became president. Trump denies this, but says he's not talking to the grand jury. The man responsible for killing 8 people on a New York City bike path will not face a death penalty. He does, however, get an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. Jurors said they could not reach a unanimous verdict, which is necessary for a death penalty. And Stanford University is looking into another anti-Semitic incident on campus. This is the 3rd one in just 2 weeks. Swastikas and an image resembling Hitler were drawn on a Jewish student's door. Campus Public Safety is investigating the incident as a hate crime, but have yet to identify any suspects. And a Texas judge scheduled oral arguments for this Wednesday in the closely watched abortion pill lawsuit. An anti-abortion group argues the process the FDA used to evaluate the medication was unlawful and should be revoked. If the judge rules in their favor, the medication could become unavailable even in states where abortion is protected. And not too far from where we are here in Los Angeles, a trio of world leaders is meeting in San Diego. President Biden is with the British and Australian prime ministers to finalize a defense pact between the 3 nations. It's aimed to counter what they see as the threat China poses in the Indo-Pacific. Before that meeting, though, the British prime minister met with our very own Lester Holt, where he called China a systemic challenge to the world order.
Is China a threat? China represents the biggest state threat to our economic interests, for sure, and is a systemic challenge for the world order. Now, that's why it's important that we take steps to protect ourselves against that. So in the UK, we've recently blocked hostile investment in sensitive sectors like semiconductors. That's an important thing to be doing, and we will continue to do what is necessary to keep our country safe.
And joining us now is NBC's chief international correspondent, Keir Simmons. Keir, thanks so much for joining us. Speaking of China, it looks like China's President Xi is planning to travel to Russia's capital, Moscow, to meet with Vladimir Putin as soon as next week. What can we expect from that?
Well, there's so much going on there, Gadi. I'll try and simplify it for you, but it really is multi-dimensional. The Chinese are trying to secure Russia, but keep their economic links with Europe, and at the same time show their diplomatic dominance to America. On the other hand, the Russians are hoping for a diplomatic victory, seeing Vladimir Putin standing next to President Xi of China. And then we're hearing there may be a conversation, the first conversation between President Xi, President Zelensky. President Zelensky is going to want to try to persuade China not to send weapons to Russia. Overall, this may be framed by China as efforts towards a peace deal or maybe even just an armistice, but I do think that is a long way off, Gadi.
And Keir, you've spent more time in Russia than anybody I know in the last year or so. What are Russians saying as they see all this play out?
Yeah, and it's a difficult place to operate, but we did go to Georgia, to Tbilisi, on the border, and what we saw there were lots of young Russians who had left the country. Remember, there was a draft where they were going to be forced to join the military, maybe even fight in Ukraine. Many of them didn't want that, so thousands left. We spoke to one 23-year-old called Vladi. He didn't want to give us his second name. Just take a listen to what he had to say about having to leave his motherland.
I have a big family, and my girlfriend lives in Russia, and it was difficult to make this decision, but I don't want to go in the war, and I think that this whole mobilization thing will be globalist, and
you think that in time everybody will be called up?
Yeah.
Just standing there in that tiny kitchen, a really small apartment, Gadi, you just really got a sense of this young man who'd given up everything because of what he said he feared. And I think it just underscores how much is being lost, clearly on the Ukrainian side, but also on the Russian side. When something like this happens, it changes a country. And I've been watching Russia really deeply change as this war has developed over the past year. So much pain for many on both sides of this conflict.
So much pain and an ominous warning. Keir Simmons, thanks so much. And Oscar season may be over, but we're not done rooting for the underdogs, because who doesn't love a good Cinderella story? I'm talking, of course, about March Madness. It kicks off tomorrow, and who better to help fill out your bracket than Steve Kornacki. Steve?
All right, Gadi. Well, the field is set here. 68 teams. You're looking at the men's bracket here. Going to be a couple of what amount to play-in games this week. But then on Thursday, you'll have 64 teams, and the fun begins. Wall-to-wall basketball for 4 straight days. By the end of Sunday night, we have only 16 teams left in this tournament. The 4 number 1 seeds, Alabama, the Crimson Tide, they were actually chosen as the number 1 overall seed. The committee that selects this field thinks Alabama's the best of the best. Let's see if they can prove it on the court. Houston, they're a number 1 seed. Hey, the Final Four is in their hometown. It's in Houston this year. Can they get there and play in that? Kansas, the defending champion, another number 1 seed, and the Purdue Boilermakers out of the Big Ten Conference, the 4th number 1 seed here. So you got a couple days to fill out the bracket, a couple of trends, a couple of numbers we can point to. Maybe they could be a little helpful for you here. Keep in mind, you like to pick upsets. Well, the 16 beating the 1 is the ultimate upset. I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's almost impossible. It's happened once. The 16 seeds are 1 and 147 in the modern history of this tournament against the number 1 seeds. It was UMBC, Maryland, Baltimore County, that beat Virginia. That's the only time it's ever happened. If you're looking for an upset, though, in your bracket, take a look at the 12 seeds. 12 of the last 14 tournaments, at least 112 has beaten a 5 seed. Also, when you're thinking of the national champion, the cream does tend to rise to the top. Basically, 2/3 of national champions in the modern era have been number 1 seeds, but don't be too chalky here, because we've only had 1 Final Four since 1985 that was made up of all number 1 seeds. So be careful. Don't take too much chalk. And by the way, it is hard to repeat. We say Kansas is trying to do that this year. Only twice in the last half century has a team gone back-to-back as the national champion. That's the challenge for the Jayhawks. Going to be a ton of fun, Gadi.
Don't be too chalky. Steve Kornacki, always a pleasure. And here's your historical tidbit for the night. The Cold War ended in 1991, but a dark relic remains scattered across the United States: nuclear missile silos. And people have actually bought a lot of these old sites and made them into homes. NBC LX reporter Greg Bledsoe has a story.
These fantastic views with the wind turbines.
So it's been sitting here abandoned for quite some time.
We're the third owners.
Third owners of this site. Many people out there are very curious.
Right below us, it drops down 176 feet.
It is an Atlas F missile silo. So yeah, this was a pretty serious spot.
This was built in a response to Sputnik. That was during the Cold War in the 50s. We rapidly were building our missile defense systems. So they built 12 of these Atlas F missile silos in Kansas, and they built 72 of them all across the nation. So this would have been a strategic target. The Russians would have known where these were at. That's why it was designed to be able to withstand a nuclear strike. So the concrete here at the surface is 9 feet thick. Pretty incredible. So come on down.
It's quiet, it's dark, it's the same temperature year-round. There's a lot of peace under there.
So here's the original launch control desk. This goes to the escape hatch. This is where the launch codes were kept. This missile silo is 52 feet in diameter and 176 feet from surface down to the bottom. $12.8 million to build this. That would have been over $110 million in today's equivalency.
So what happened to all these?
It's decommissioned in 1965.
So they were really only in operation for about 5 years. Then what happened?
Most of these properties are in like private hands. Missile base owners are kind of in a small club for sure.
People have gotten really creative with these things.
Yes, so like one of our friends down in Texas, he converted his silo into a dive center. You can actually do deep water and nighttime diving there.
You've got our friend Larry Hall, who converted his into a 15-floor condominium complex.
Yeah, this is a luxury survival condo. Another person turned his into what he calls a bachelor pad.
Do you have plans for yours?
Yeah, we're turning this place into an amazing destination resort to learn about the history.
That sounds like a lot of work.
I've spent a lot of time down there. So far, I've hauled out of this facility about 15,000 pounds of metal. Yes! These are our plans on fixing up the place. You know, we can repurpose this and take it to the next level. So it gets me real excited every time I go down there.
It totally makes sense that people want to know more. They're interested. This is a big piece of our history that people don't know much about, and it's kind of fascinating. Yeah, I see potential, and I feel potential.
Fascinating indeed. Thanks, Greg. When we come back, the first installment of The Future of Everything. And we're talking AI voice cloning. I tried it, sounded pretty close, but you'll have to listen and tell me what you think. That's coming up.
Vamos a ver si trabaja en español también.
That does sound like me if I was from Spain instead of Guatemala, but that's close. Yeah.
And now to a segment we are calling The Future of Everything, where we look not only at the latest headlines in tech and science, but tell you about emerging technology that could change the way we live. And up first, a Finnish company using sand as a cheaper alternative to store heat, aka a sand battery. And here is how it works. The company uses electricity generated by wind and solar to heat up silos full of sand to almost 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And with the right insulation, that sand can hold that heat without much loss for months. The sand is then used to warm homes and businesses in the winter months when the price of energy is at its most expensive. The company Polar Night Energy says these sand batteries cost 8 to 10 times less than traditional lithium ones. And a few years ago, Elon Musk said that fighter jets would soon become obsolete due to advances in AI. I thought about that when we came across this story. Just last month, AI software flew a fighter jet for more than 17 hours. Now, this was the first time AI was used on a tactical aircraft. Now, the Air Force says it's developing an entire fleet of these AI jets. The United States isn't the only country experimenting with the technology either. Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom have also announced plans to use algorithms instead of pilots. And now to a story you have to hear to believe. AI technology is generating some pretty spot-on imitations of people's real voices, including mine, but the implications are debatable.
When you think deepfakes and artificial intelligence, you might not think DJ David Guetta, but take a look at his latest sonic surprise.
This is the future rave sound. I'm getting lost in an underground. This is the future rave sound. I'm getting lost in an underground.
There's something that I made as a joke, and it works so good I could not believe it. So I typed, write a verse in the style of Eminem, and I played the record, and people went nuts.
It's just the latest example of what's sweeping the internet today. Deep fakes that aren't just about looks, but sound. See this speech by Leonardo DiCaprio?
I stand before you not as an expert.
Well, a voice replication company used AI to generate the sound of podcaster Joe Rogan.
One of the 400,000 people who marched in
Steve Jobs.
And the billions of others around the world.
Robert Downey Jr.
As an actor, I pretend for a living.
And others. The technology to quickly clone someone's voice is available to anyone with an internet connection, giving them the ability to make manufactured content like this.
I'm hungry. Hey, boy, give me some chicken nuggets.
To see how the tech works, we headed to Silicon Valley's Resemble AI, a company that recently teamed up with the filmmakers behind the Andy Warhol Diaries, recreating Warhol's voice for some of the narration.
I went down to the office because they were making a robot of me.
Resemble AI says, unlike other voice cloning platforms, they require a person's consent before uploading samples of their voice, which we gave. So we uploaded a few examples of my own voice and cadence, and soon I could type in anything and have it come out sounding freakishly close.
This is what my voice sounds like when I clone it. Let's see.
This is what my voice sounds like when I clone it.
Wow. And this is just based on 5-10 minutes of my voice?
5 minutes of audio, yeah.
So we've got Lester in here, too.
Please take care of yourselves.
If somebody can invent a voice out of thin air, where can you apply that?
Imagine how many viewers don't speak English. They may speak Spanish, French, Hindi, Mandarin, etc. But most content is being published in English, or a lot of North American content is published in English. But imagine if all that content, you retain that voice signature, so it still sounds like Gadi. But now Gadi is speaking French, and he's speaking Mandarin, and he's speaking Hindi, and there's a drop down. And so we offer like 52 languages here. We've enabled 5 for you. So we'll click Spanish here. Click play.
Vamos a ver si trabaja en español también.
That does sound like me if I was from Spain instead of Guatemala, but that's close. Yeah, and even within like the dialects here, you'll notice that it's highlighted like it's highlighted Spanish Spain here, and there's like different dialects as well of Spanish. Yeah.
With the tech has come the potential for misinformation and abuse.
What's your reaction when you see headlines about hackers taking somebody's voice without their permission, replicating it, and impersonating them?
We have to be very careful about deploying these models out and how they're being accessed. We also have to be aware that these models are going to be used by everybody. We watermark all of our files that are being generated so we can detect whether it's Resemble or not. We published open source code about 2 years ago that could detect deepfake audio files, so it could tell you like whether an audio file is real or fake.
Resemble AI says they have safeguards to prevent fraud, but critics say others don't.
How do you see people using this technology?
First things is fraud. People are cloning other people's voices in order to defraud individuals and institutions. So think the types of phishing scams that we have all seen, more sophisticated, because now you're going to get a phone call from somebody that sounds like somebody you know.
Somebody that sounds like your grandma.
Yeah, exactly. Or your boss, or whoever it is. We are absolutely going to eventually see it in the misinformation and disinformation side. It's already starting to happen. We are going to see these technologies being used to create non-consensual sexual imagery, which largely targets women.
Is there any going back? I mean, is there any future where all of this doesn't exist?
Every year and a half, twice as fast, twice as small, twice as powerful. There's no putting the cat back in the bag here.
Meaning going forward, just because you hear it doesn't mean you should believe it.
Gadi Schwartz, NBC News.
That wasn't me. That was not me. And before we go from your family to ours, I want to introduce some very special guests, so stay tuned. Now, normally right around this time of night, I'd be showing you a bunch of stories that really moved us. But tonight, since it's our first show together, I wanted to share this guiding principle that I try to follow. You see, I'm an optimist, but when you cover the news and you see all that happens in the world on a daily basis, optimism doesn't come naturally. It's a very conscious, very deliberate choice you have to make every single day. And in a world where there is so much difficulty, so much division, we're going to also do our best to try to seek out the stories that bring us closer together. And we want to look towards a better future. Some days that is easier to do than others, but where there is struggle, any correspondent on this network will tell you you can find the best of humanity waiting to bring unity, but you got to seek it out. That's it for me. But before I go, I want to thank you for letting us into your homes, and I'd love to return the favor. Kiki, this is my universe. This is Kira Schwartz. This is my wife, Kimmy Schwartz. They came to our first show to say hi. Can you say hi, Kiki? Hi. Hi. Again, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Gadi Schwartz. Here's to tomorrow. But until then, stay tuned now. Say bye. Say bye. Bye-bye. Good job.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.